I try and keep, frankly, my mouth shut and my ears open because I think listening is underrated.
There you go.
We should listen to them and listen to what they say and take them at their word.
I'm Mitch.
And I'm Missy.
We're co-workers.
He's the boss, and we're married.
And she's the boss. Together, we host Good Faith Weekly, a podcast on faith and culture.
What could possibly go wrong?
Tune in and find out. Missy. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up after this week's midterm elections. And then later on in the pod, we sat down with author Katherine Stewart. Her book, The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, is an outstanding read. And we talked to her about the election and how Christian nationalism shaped these midterms. So it's going to be a good pod. Stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hello.
Well, we made it.
I mean, you did better than I did.
Well, only one of us cried last night. It was in a fetal position.
Well, yes. I might have medicated and gone to bed at 8:30.
Maybe.
But we live in Oklahoma,
We
so
do.
There was a good reason.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
anyways.
So, but midterms have come, midterms have gone. But as of this recording, still some unanswered questions, I guess. The control of the U.S. Congress is still up in the air, both the House and the Senate. We do know for certain that the Senate race down in Georgia between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker is heading to a runoff, so that's going to be interesting. So, a lot of shocking things. We can talk about those a little later in the pod after we interview Katherine, but the red wave never came. The thing that I am so happy about, we don't have to watch any more political ads.
Okay, first of all, you need to clarify that because you just aged us. We don't actually watch commercials. You need to say that.
Well, okay,
but because we're in hotels.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I should have prefaced that.
When we're in hotels and you turn on the TV or whatever, you're forced to sit and watch them. Normally we don't. And we've been in Kansas, we've been in Georgia, Texas, you've been in Alabama. Mm-hmm. We've been in several southern states, and so we've been forced to ingest many political ads. And it's the absurdity.
It is a whooping.
It's baffling.
Yeah, it is. But no more ads for a while, thank goodness. Except if you're in Georgia, then sorry.
So yeah, it's been rough. It's been a rough 24 hours. We were just getting ready to record earlier, and we got a phone call from a dear friend who just lost her grandmother this past weekend, and then today her mother was found unresponsive and is on a ventilator in ICU, and our prayers go out to this family. But so we did not record earlier. We ran to the hospital and sat with them for a little while, but it just feels like there's a lot of heaviness in the world.
Yeah,
both personally and nationally. And so I thought maybe we could just start out with something a little light.
Oh, good. We're not taking a quiz, are we?
It is not a quiz.
Thank God.
It's not a quiz. But I, 10 minutes ago, gave Mitch an assignment, and I said, if you were running for office, what would your campaign platform be? And we've each come up with a list. These are all just for fun, guys. This is nothing serious. Of course, we want world peace. Of course, we want to feed everyone and give healthcare and all these things. This is just for fun. So, for fun, what are your campaign platforms?
Okay, so I took the assignment, and I do have some platforms, but I also have some slogans. So we'll alternate.
You're such an overachiever.
I know.
Seriously.
I'm sorry. So here's my first one. Turn America blush and bashful. Shout out to Steel Magnolias.
You do know that Weezer is like one of my heroes, right?
Yeah, she is.
I want to be her when I grow up.
So forget this red, blue, and purple stuff. Let's go. Let's go blush and bashful. Let's go blush and bashful.
Okay, let's just do it.
How about you? What's one you have?
Okay, so one of my first ones, and this is something we just experienced like 20 minutes ago as we were coming home from the hospital, Sonic receipts will be banned. When I order a 99-cent soda from Sonic, I do not need a paper receipt. It is difficult enough to deal with the straw trash in my car.
That's a good one.
Stop giving me a receipt. I ordered it on the app. I know. I have the record of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need a paper receipt.
And are you going to bring it back? I mean, that's
Same goes for CVS.
Oh my gosh.
I don't need it. Don't need the mile of paper. I really don't. I'm
sorry.
already contributing to the waste in the planet by getting the Sonic soda with my styrofoam cup. I apologize. I don't need the paper too.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. So, so this one is a little personal, and I hope it doesn't.
No.
Yeah, but I would run on a platform to ban olives and restrict the use of ranch dressing.
Okay, first of all, if you restrict the use of ranch dressing, you are doomed.
I won't
You
get
can
it.
just forget it. You can stop right now because you will never, ever win.
Oh, and also I will outlaw deviled eggs.
Oh, now you've gone too far.
Okay.
Now you have gone too far. Because my deviled eggs are amazing.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word for that.
They are. You just don't like the smell when you
I
open
do
the
not.
refrigerator.
I
I
do
don't
not.
blame you. They do stink, but they're good. Okay. So I am going to say that we as a nation are going to collectively agree, and if I'm elected, it will be mandated, that we all donate our old cars to Cars for Kids so that we never, ever, ever, ever have to hear the jingle again.
Hey, I'm all for that. That's great.
Okay.
So, all right. So another one I've got is I want to restructure the entire tax system so that when Americans have to pay taxes, they can pay with poker chips.
Okay. What about Monopoly money? Does that
I would say Monopoly money or poker chips. I think that it kind of makes it a little bit more fun. I mean, if you're paying,
Maybe.
you're angry.
I'm not sure it's going to fix any potholes, but okay, Papa. You go with your pep. Between your ranch dressing and your poker chips. you're
Oh,
already
I've got
out of
another
this
old
race.
man complaint too. Go ahead.
All right. So I am going to ban any sort of FaceTime or speakerphone conversations in public without AirPods, earphones.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how often we're in an airport or in a public venue where people are either FaceTiming or talking on a speakerphone, like out loud with no AirPods in.
Of course, unless they're listening to Good Faith Weekly, then
Well, sure. Then do it loud and
turn
proud.
it up a little bit.
I
yeah.
mean, we can embarrass ourselves in front of everybody. It's fine.
That's right. Well, speaking of sound, here's one I have. Limit the sound in restaurants, the music in restaurants.
Oh my god!
Because it's just too loud these days.
You and I will die on this hill, and I know it makes us so old. But we found a restaurant a couple months ago in Kansas City that had it was the coolest place. If I could remember the name of it right now, I would say it and give them a plug. But the vibe was great. It was Southern, fried chicken and biscuits and gravy. It was amazing. And I told Mitch, I was like, oh my gosh. And listen, they've got a great playlist and it's at a reasonable volume.
I know.
I will visit that restaurant.
We put that in the Yelp review.
We did.
All right, you got another one?
Okay, hang on. Let me look at my list. Okay. So I am fully supportive of just gender neutral bathrooms in public. You use the restroom that you feel most comfortable in.
Okay.
Fully supportive. Let me say that. But all homes should have gender specific bathrooms. I raised 2 boys and lived with a husband. And I will tell you that yes, a home should have a boys' bathroom and a girls' bathroom.
Okay. That's fair.
I will run on that
That
platform.
is fair. So if I am elected, I want to make the promise to create a new department, and it's going to be the Department of the Internet.
Okay.
Because, halfway serious, I think, but because it's just such a prominent part of our lives now. And I know that there are government agencies that oversee it, but I think it needs its own dedicated department. And I am going to appoint Secretary Shannon, the 12-year-old kid in his parents' basement, as the new secretary of the Department of the Internet. Yes. Shannon will do a fabulous job.
Okay, so my next one is all women's pants, skirts, and dresses will have pockets.
Yeah, I can't speak to that one.
I'm winning on that one. That's the end. Every one of our female listeners out there right now just said, amen, hallelujah, you have my vote.
I heard that.
I guarantee you.
Okay, so here is my final one.
Okay.
And it is not necessarily a platform, but it's my slogan for Randall 2024. Mm-hmm. Simply this: Make America Great Again. 1491.
Well, you should have ended last with that one, but I have one more on my list that I feel like is super important.
Okay, let's
that
hear
we
it.
need to say. Henceforth, we will ban cilantro, sweet pickles, and cucumbers.
Let it
We
be
will
said.
never ban a people group. We will never ban, someone who wants to come to the country, but we will ban cilantro, sweet pickles, and cucumbers.
I like it.
There you go.
And
we will have all the ranch dressing.
I love it. I was going to also suggest, like building a wall around Mar-a-Lago. So,
I can get on board with that.
or even putting a dome on it or something.
I mean, I could go for that. I'm sure I'll think of some more that were even better as soon as we stop recording.
So,
This is
hey,
such a last minute thing.
Hey, let us know what your platform or slogan might be if you were to run for public office, because I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So,
Absolutely, definitely.
Well, next, Missy and I sit down with author Katherine Stewart of The Power Worshippers, and it is a great conversation that you're not going to miss.
Hey listeners, check us out online at goodfaithmedia.org and follow us on social at gfmedia.org. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I'm new here and could really use the feedback, but only if it's glowing. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we got a very special guest with us. Katherine Stewart is an investigative reporter and author who covered religious liberty, politics, policy, and education for over a decade. Her latest book, The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, is a rare look inside the machinery of the movement that brought Donald Trump to power. Stewart's journalism appears in the New York Times op-ed, NBC, The New Republic, and the New York Review of Books. Katherine, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
It's great to be in conversation with you both. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Katherine, let's just unpack this week.
Man, you're just jumping right in, aren't you? I mean, you're not ignoring the donkey or the elephant in the room. So go ahead.
I'm trying to cope right now. So we just had the midterms. At the time of this recording, nothing. We know that the House is likely going to the Republicans. We're not sure about the Senate yet. I believe I just heard that the Warnock Walker race is going into a runoff. So tell us, based on what we know so far, what have we learned?
Well, what we've learned so far is that, many Americans have questioned whether the Republican Party is going to reject the language of Christian nationalism, this sort of exclusionary religious nationalism, or whether it's going to continue to exploit religion to divide Americans, to drive the kind of extreme polarization we're seeing in our politics today, to continue to spread misinformation, election lies, et cetera, conspiracism. And the answer, I think, is that there's no immediate prospect for reform, unfortunately, even among Republicans who won their races and were not endorsed by Mr. Trump. I'm thinking about Ron DeSantis. They succeeded often by doubling down on Trumpist and Christian nationalist messaging and methods. So like DeSantis, for instance, put out this promo ad saying that God sent him to save Florida and the nation. Have you guys seen that?
Yes. Yeah.
I have
It's
not.
really astonishing. For anybody who's listening and hasn't seen it, just Google it now. It's kind of jaw-dropping, and you think it's a parody, but it's not. DeSantis and his people know that Christian nationalism is the road to power in today's Republican Party. And they also know that when faith leaders denounce his abuse of religion and say this doesn't represent the gospel. As we understand it, you're exploiting religion to divide Americans. Leaders of the Christian nationalist movement are going to really quickly reinterpret this as an attack on God, an attack on religion, and an attack on themselves. And they use it to stoke paranoia among the rank and file. So even though Mastriano lost lost against Fetterman in Pennsylvania, you have other figures such as DJ Vance, who was once a never Trumper and who was sort of a member of the, went to a coastal elite college that he's always bashing, and went, doubled down on Christian nationalism and Trumpism, and he's won. DeSantis won. The astonishing thing about Georgia, look, the results aren't in yet, but I read a statistic for exit poll that said 88% of white evangelicals supported Walker. And that just shows that this is pure politics. This is not, Christian nationalism is not a religion. It's not about theology. Walker had multiple children by multiple women, multiple abortions. I believe he's been accused of spousal abuse, or he's lied about a number of things. And yet 88% of people who claim to stand for family values are voting for this candidate. And it's really shocking. It shows the sort of moral hollowness of the movement overall. This is a movement that claims to stand for the American family, but in fact, they're driving support for politicians who frankly make it harder for many American families to succeed.
Well said. One of the things that, we gathered from the election this week is that it did appear that those who were extreme were rejected by the voting populace. There were some instances where they were elected, but overall it looked like there was a lot of pushback. Now, Christian nationalism, and we're going to talk about the book here in a little bit because it's just absolutely brilliant, but Christian nationalism was certainly on the ballot this midterm. We have tried to define it here at Good Faith Media as this mythology that the United States was created as a Christian nation and Christians should be ruling or governing over the entire country. Katherine, what makes this so different than any other period of history? Because there's something different about this brand of Christian nationalism.
Well, Christian nationalism is, on the one hand, as you said, a set of ideas and ideology, but on the other hand, it's a political movement and an organized quest for political power. Mm-hmm. And what makes this moment different is that this movement has invested in a very dense organizational infrastructure for decades. It's extremely well organized. So the movement consists of right-wing policy groups, legal advocacy groups, networking organizations that get the leadership of different organizations on the same page and bring them together with big funders of the movement, legislative initiatives, data initiatives, a vast, right-wing, I would say, often fact-free messaging sphere that spreads conspiracism and paranoia. And the movement invested in the different features of this organizational infrastructure for many decades. It was sort of hiding in plain sight. It's not like they're hiding. It's like, we're not listening. For decades, they've been telling us that they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in the principles of equal rights and pluralism that represent the best of the American promise. And I think sometimes it's really hard for us to listen. We tend to want to reframe what people are saying in ways that make us feel more comfortable. But as a consequence, a lot of folks have just simply not taken this movement seriously as a political force, and it really should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, not only were there politicians on the ballot this week, abortion rights was on the ballot as well. In fact, in 4 different states, Michigan, California, Vermont, and Kentucky, voters had their say when it came to abortion rights. The first 3 states enshrined abortion in their state constitution. Kentucky rejected an amendment that would have said there was no right to the procedure at a state level. So that was promising for those of us who believe in women's reproductive health. Do you see this as a sign that maybe faith-based voters are shifting on issues such as abortion rights and marriage equality?
Well, the culture war issues, look, for many years, leaders, they know if you can get people to vote on a couple of binary black and white issues, you can control their vote. So they directed a lot of messaging around abortion, same-sex marriage, these sort of identity, sexuality issues, because sexuality and those kinds of issues are almost like rocket fuel to the movement. But of course, they endorse a much broader, economic policies, social policies, foreign policies, and the like. But abortion was like the number one issue for them. I think for the true believers in the movement, like for movement leaders, it remains a huge issue. I went to this National Pro-Life Summit this past January in Washington, D.C., and movement leaders like Christiane Hawkins of Americans United for Life said, well, what we want to do is introduce an amendment banning abortion all across the country in every state, but it's going to take some time to set that up. And a head of the Alliance Defending Freedom said very much the same thing, but they know that they need to look, abortion rights are extremely popular among Americans, Christian and non-Christian, religious and non-religious alike. An overwhelming majority of Americans support abortion rights in some form. We already have certain limitations in place, et cetera, but the overwhelming majority recognize that the right to choose is a really important part of women's reproductive health. So once they overturned Roe versus Wade, I think for the leaders, there was a bit of a fear of the backlash, and they haven't pushed abortion too hard prior to the midterm elections. They sort of backed off for a little bit. They're very strategic. I mean, This movement is nothing if not tactical, but they create other culture war issues that they've been pushing very hard. The issue of trans sports.
Right.
Like, I don't know about you guys, I get mail every single day about the threat that there might be some trans kids, in a sports team in my daughter's public school. And, whatever one thinks of those issues, our country is facing massive issues relating to economic security, related to our foreign policy, related to our infrastructure, related to healthcare. And those issues are like, you ever see what, like the cat toy that shines a little red laser beam on the floor and your cat jumps after it?
Yes.
That's what those culture war issues, they push these issues every single day. So they get people talking about this little thing over here. So they're not looking at all this other stuff that's happening over there, the stuff that's really happening around them, the kitchen table issues that really matter to the economic security of our families and the health of our country.
They would rather talk about issues like that rather than, Exxon and BP making billions and billions of profits in the first quarter. So that really affects all Americans when that happens.
It's absolutely true. I mean, climate issues, that's another
right.
thing.
100%.
Yeah, climate denial.
So, Katherine, your book, The Power Worshippers, that came out a few years ago, is really just as relevant today as when it came out. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a story from, I believe it was the introduction, that I felt like was just such a great glimpse and an overview of what is happening within Christian nationalism. But you talked about your child's school sending out a notification about a Bible study, and also note where you live, because I think that's important to the story.
Sure. That's, in 2009, my husband and I were living in Santa Barbara, California. Our daughter was in the first grade. Our son was a baby. And something happened that seemed like nothing at first, right? We learned that a Good News Club was coming to our public elementary school. Now, Good News Clubs are after-school clubs designed to convert children in their very earliest years of learning into a deeply reactionary form of evangelical Christianity. And we're talking little kids here. So a centerpiece of the program of these Good News Clubs is called the Wordless Book. It has no words, just shapes and pictures and colors, and it's used to convert children in public schools who are too young to read. The clubs are designed to convince them that they're going to go to hell if they don't conform to the club's version of Christianity. and that they need to attend the supposedly right kind of church. So in our community, I could see that these clubs confused little kids into thinking that their public school endorsed this religion. Adults leading the clubs were using their position inside the school to get kids attending the clubs to target their non-Christian classmates or those attending the supposedly wrong kinds of churches for what I could really only describe as faith-based bullying and bigotry. So here's something interesting that happened. Our church was down the road from Westmont College, and it's an evangelical college. So the parent body at our school is perhaps a third to half evangelical. But these parents and most of my friends who are like moms in the public school, most of them were Westmont affiliated, they did not want a Good News Club coming to our school. So they met with the Good News Club leaders and they said, we too are evangelical, we believe in the Great Commission, but this isn't right for our public school. We'd like to offer you free and better space in the church, literally next door to the school. I mean, It's a beautiful church. Who wouldn't want to be there at the same time, right? For free. And the Good News Club leaders declined. They insisted on being in the public school. This really, it was really astonishing to me. I just raised alarm bells. I thought, okay, why don't they want to be in the church? Why do they need to be in the public school? What do they really believe? And, how is it legal and possible for them to be in public elementary schools, given our separation of church and state? So I started researching Good News Clubs and the organization behind them, which is called the Child Evangelism Fellowship. I discovered that these Good News Clubs had only been had been excluded from public schools because of Establishment Clause concerns, separation of church and state, until 2001, when they won a key Supreme Court decision called Good News Club versus Milford Central School. That decision, I researched the sort of legal strategy that had led to that Supreme Court win by the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the leading legal advocacy groups of the Christian, nationalist movement. And what they did is they ran a very careful, very strategic legal strategy over about 15 years, bringing the right cases to the right courts to put into place these novel legal building blocks that would recast religion, that would destroy Establishment Clause concerns and cast religion as just another form of speech like any other. I mean, it sort of begs the question, is religion just speech from a certain point of view? Well, if it is, what is the justification for its special tax privileges that other non-religious nonprofits don't enjoy? What is the justification for its exemption from anti-discrimination law, which other non-religious nonprofits are not allowed to engage in? Religions are allowed to discriminate against women, LGBT Americans, other people of other racial identities, religious groups. They can do that because they're religions. They have a special status in our Constitution, but this is why church and state should be kept separate. But anyway, that's sort of a long story as to how I fell down this rabbit hole. I ended up, going to Good News Clubs from coast to coast. I went to the National Convention of the Child Evangelism Fellowship. I heard interfaith marriages described by their keynote speaker as interracial marriages and worthy of condemnation. I heard Catholics referred to as not Christians. I heard Congregationalists referred and liberal Presbyterians referred to as members of a quote New Age religion. The contempt for people who are not like them was really astonishing. And here's the thing that really shocked me and took a lot of time for me to wrap my head around. Even as this movement was exploiting public schools, using taxpayer-funded facilities to set up their clubs and confuse little kids into thinking that their religion has the, cloak of authority of public schools, even as they're doing all this, they described public education with contempt. They called our schools scenes of spiritual battle. They called the mission fields and our children the harvest. I remember one of the keynote speakers said, knock down all doors, all barriers to the public schools and take the gospel to this open mission field now, not later, I'll get down on the mat and kick down the doors. Like there was a lot of really aggressive language. And I came to recognize that the attack on public education, the Good News Clubs were just one small part of a larger attack on public education, but the attack on public education was just one small part of a much larger attack on American constitutional democracy. And so that was about 15 years ago. Yeah. And I started, really researching this movement, its infrastructure, its legal strategy. And the more I learned, the more concerned I became.
As I was listening to that, and you start the story just talking about this group that wanted to have this Bible study, and you tell the story about, offering the space next door to the church, and you kind of went on. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then you said Good News Club, and I just thought, oh my goodness, I remember the notes in my kids' folders for Good News Club. I remember some of their friends going. I didn't know at the time what, exactly what all was involved, and never sent my kids, but it just was like this, it's everywhere.
Yeah. It's fun sometimes when Christian nationalism, this kind of thing shows up in our backyards or in our neighborhood schools. We just think it's a local initiative driven by local personalities. And, we don't think anything of it, but it's really just one, if you really follow it, it's like looking at the leg of the elephant or the hair on the elephant's leg, but missing the elephant itself,
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading your book, another complementary book to yours would be The Shadow Network by Ann Nelson. And what you said a moment ago, they're very tactical in their strategies, and they know what they're doing. And now we're seeing the results of it. I mean, you said it very clearly as you laid out the legal strategies behind the Good News Club, and their point is to have all these test cases across the country to eventually end up at the Supreme Court. So, that is such an important truth that we need to grasp, that this just isn't, a bunch of, people of faith or preachers or lawyers. They are working in tandem together to push this really radical agenda. So you mentioned that you attend all these meetings, and in the book you talk about going to the pastor's briefing in Unionville, North Carolina. Katherine, do you just like to stay angry? Because
I wondered as I was hearing about all of the places you went and sat in and observed, I thought, how in the world did you do this?
You must be a saint, because I would have stood up and yelled something, but you're there taking notes. I'm so glad you're doing it.
Good for you, yes.
Yeah,
but I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about when you go into these settings, you've told us a little bit about something, or some of them that you've been to, but what is the atmosphere? I mean, they're just out in the open now. Used to they would try to kind of lock it away, but now it's out in the open. And then also, we're a couple of weeks away from Thanksgiving, Katherine. We're all going to be sitting around tables with our family members who disagree with us violently on these issues.
Yes, we are.
How can we talk about these issues and what's going on in our country productively? So tell us a little bit about all these events you're going to, and then give us some tools to get through Thanksgiving.
Okay, well, we'll start with Unionville and a lot of these other places. Look, I just go places that I'm allowed to go. You guys could go too. I'm not on staff anywhere. I purchase a ticket like everyone else. And, I just go where I'm places I'm allowed to go, and I use my own name. And, I try and keep, frankly, my mouth shut and my ears open, because I think listening is underrated.
There you go.
I think, we should listen to them and listen to what they say and take them at their word. They've been telling us what we want to do. I mean, this is a movement. They're very clear. They're like, we'd like to do X, and then they go to do it, So, but yeah, Unionville, North Carolina was fascinating. I went to that church with a friend of mine who is a pastor in a church that was a member of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And we were there to get, I guess, information in advance of an election. And, there's no past, even though somebody in the beginning, I can't remember who gave one of this, we do not endorse any political party. This is nonpartisan, et cetera, et cetera. There's no pastor who came away, and there were dozens of pastors in the room. There's no pastor who came away with any doubt about which way their congregation was expected to vote. And they were told that they were needed to turn out their congregations. Look, they know if you can get the pastors, you can get some subset of their congregation. So they get these pastors together. They give them very sophisticated messaging tools and materials. They give them voter guides, sermon starters, which frankly, as a pastor, it's a hard job, like it makes your job easier. Voter guides, sermon starters, videos to air at church. And then they were handing out instructions for how to form something called a community impact team, which is so that the pastors don't have to say, you need to vote for this candidate, or these are the issues you need to vote on, et cetera. But if they can get members of a team of congregants who are very politically active, motivated, connected to other congregants and motivated to turn out the vote, they can get the congregants to do it. But it's the pastor, with a book that it's like 140-page book of tabbed material about covering every aspect of how to create a community impact team manual. And it was an astonishingly sophisticated document. And I thought, this is amazing. At another event, I met a woman who was a member of a community impact team at her church. And she talked all about how they were messaging around abortion and all the terrible sex ed they're teaching kids in the schools, and biblical economics, which is the sort of fusion of reactionary religion with far-right economics, like almost libertarian economics. So I went to another similar event. So that event in Unionville was part of an organization called Watchmen on the Wall. It's a Family Research Council affiliated organization. They have tens of thousands of affiliated pastors nationwide. They do events all across the country, especially focusing on swing states in advance of key elections. I went to another similar initiative called Faith Wins. It's very much along the same lines. They do events for pastors all around the country. They've done hundreds of them, reaching thousands of pastors. And at that event, David Barton spoke. You guys know who David Barton is.
Yes.
So he was there with his son, Tim, who was also doing presentations. Chad Connolly of the Council for National Policy was there telling these pastors, y'all need to get yourself out there and you need to get your people out there. And then there was another pastor presenting who said, the church is not a cruise ship. The church is a battleship. That was just a chilling line for me.
It is.
And then with them, they had this guy named Hogan Gidley, who is a former member of the Trump administration. And he was running some quote unquote elections integrity project. And he was there to spread disinformation and lies about the election. So he goes on and on about how the election was stolen and a bunch of dead people are voting. And then he said, you guys all saw all that, corruption in Arizona, didn't you? This was weeks after the Republican-led investigation by that Republican group, the Cyber Ninjas. Remember them?
Oh, yeah.
They led this investigation to see if there were any irregularities in the voting, and they turned up nothing, maybe a couple dozen extra votes for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. But this guy was still messaging on the lie that they turned up corruption, even though they turned up nothing. Sure. And it would have been, they reported it, everybody reported it, nothing. And, but the lie is too valuable to this movement to abandon just because it's not true. I think, one thing I wouldn't have predicted about this movement, like January 6th, honestly, wasn't that surprising given the run-up to January 6th, the fact that so many religious right leaders were spreading lies of the stolen election, the Jericho marches, sort of coordinated, buy-in of Trump's lies. But the thing that really astonished me afterwards is that Republican establishment would stand behind the insurrectionists, and that the Republican establishment would actually stand behind Trump even as he has become a national security risk, absconding with hundreds or is it thousands of documents pertaining to our national security and leaving them strewn all over his house in Mar-a-Lago, where any spy from any foreign country could find their way in as long as,
Sure. Yeah.
they look a certain way, or say the right things, or donate enough money. I mean, part of this is what's really astonishing to me. This is a movement where the leaders could have chosen to, like, country over party, and instead they chose, they chose their movement over democracy very clearly. Right.
Well, a lot of people are taking some positives out of this week's midterms. The run for 2024 began Wednesday at 12:01 a.m. And so looking ahead, Katherine, how do you see, because Christian nationalism did not go away. I mean, just because there were some strides made this week, it's still there, and it's going to be a powerful tool over the next 2 years. So put on your prophet hat for a second, and what do you see over the next 2 years? Is Christian nationalism going to continue to grow, be more influential, less influential? And what can we do as people of good faith to offer a counter narrative?
Oh, gosh. Well, I don't make predictions of the future, but one thing I am going to have my eye on is the Conservative Action Project memos. The Conservative Action Project is affiliated with the Council for National Policy, which you guys are very familiar with. That sort of connective tissue of much of the movement, one of its key networking organizations. And they issue these memos signed by many leaders of the movement infrastructure, many of the organization leaders. And those memos seem to indicate, like, we've made a decision. This is the way that we're going to go. So, like, for instance, after Trump was found to have all these documents in his house, they issued a memo saying that Christopher Wray and Merrick Garland should be impeached, and this is partisan attack and nothing but politics. It's kind of astonishing. So I will be keeping my eye on those kinds of things, and I continue to go to the meetings and gatherings. I don't think you can really know what's happening unless you are in those spaces and talking to, listening to leaders of the movement, because what they might say if they ever get invited on CNN is one thing. What they say when they're in their own spaces, they're very honest about what they want. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know they're getting started, not just with the attack on abortion, which they want to, bring to all 50 states and potentially introduce some kind of constitutional amendment, maybe through a constitutional convention, changing our constitution. But they're going to go after a range of attack on a range of individual rights, including the right to vote. Something that, they know very well is that they're in the minority. I mean, here's the good news, and that's why they want to suppress the right to vote. The good news is that those of us who reject the politics of conquest and division are in the majority. Yep. We have the power. We really need to use it. We need to, you mentioned earlier about speaking to family members, and I think we all have family members where there are some difficult conversations. And I think it's important to breathe, to remember to breathe, to listen, to be calm, and to find common ground. And I think, look, we can find common ground with anyone, whether it's, do you care about your kids' school? Do you care about healthcare? Do you care about the economy? I mean, I think a lot of folks who are lending support to this movement don't recognize that it's allied with, the sort of biblical economics that it's allied with are intensifying extreme wealth at the very top and making it so much harder for so many Americans' families to succeed. We've seen the consequences of this with, very well documented disparities in income inequality. It's, a lot of the sort of anxiety that drives support for Christian nationalism, I believe, is driven by status loss. A lot of people, whether it's, white people who wanted to be on top and all of a sudden America's multiracial and they don't get it, but it's not always like that ugly, right? Sometimes it's really just about, well, my parents were able to work and buy a house, and, my mom could, take some time off from work when she had kids, or, I didn't have to worry about whether our schools were adequately funded, and, and they didn't have to worry about this and that. And now it's harder for me to make it work for my family. I think that that's true for a lot of folks And that drives support for this movement too.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Katherine, it has been a delight chatting with you again. Her book is The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. You're going to want to go to wherever you buy your books, so your local bookstore or online, and pick up a copy, because it is absolutely great. If you want to know more about Katherine's work and her stories in journalism, her website is katherinestewart.me. And so she'll want to make certain to check her out. But before we let you go, Katherine, Missy's got one last question.
So, Katherine, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work and your research and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Well, the more to tell is that there are things we can do as individuals, like vote and get all of our friends and family to vote, but there are things we can only do when we join together. Invest in the infrastructure of democracy, defend voting rights, support different groups that are doing things that are in alignment with your values, and above all, bringing to light the dangers of religious nationalism in America.
I love that. What a way to end. Thank you so much. It's been a delight, Katherine.
Thank you so much.
It has been a really interesting conversation that we just had with Katherine Stewart. What stuck out most to you, Missy, about our conversation with Katherine?
I think, first of all, we could have just listened to her for a long time. I mean, her just time that she spent going and sitting in spaces and listening to folks. And I think, like she said, sometimes we just need to listen, and she's done that. Mm-hmm. And her book obviously lays out, her research. And so we definitely could have gone on much longer with her. We did, post-recording, still continue our conversation with her. If you want to know the history and the specifics of what's going on in a timeline, she's a great one to read. Her book, Ann Nelson's Shadow Network, that we bring up, is also a great read.
Yeah, we've had this steady stream of guests talking about Christian nationalism, and primarily because the midterms were this week. But what I found very interesting about Katherine's book was it was published 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was published last year in 2021.
Okay.
And so she was doing all the research, during the 2020 presidential election and all of that, and watching all this unfold. But her story and her points in the book are even more germane today, I think, because of what we saw after the election in 2020, of course, the insurrection on January 6th, and then the lead up to these midterms. It was just another great insight to what's going on. And man, her story about the Good News Club, what'd you think of that?
Yeah, I think, circling back real quick, mm-hmm. what she said about from her experience of being in these rooms and in these spaces, not being very surprised about January 6th, but being surprised about the lack of any leaders, on the right, kind of speaking out against it. And that she said that was what was surprising, and to me, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that's what's even more scary.
Right. And I think that's, that began to kind of come to light for me when Donald Trump was elected president. Trump is who he is. I mean, he is a shyster. He's I had another word there that I had to
find some nice words.
He's a shyster. He's a con man. He's certainly a narcissist. I mean, he is who he is. But
you can't go diagnosing people on the I was going to say the radio.
Well, that's true. He's not a good man. But at any rate, what really bothered me was that I didn't realize so many people in the country they connected with him. And there were millions and millions of people who supported him and still support him. And so that was really troubling to me. So, I think she's on to something when she says, the January 6th shouldn't have surprised us, because this is what they've been talking about. Mm-hmm. But what was surprising is how quickly some conservative politicians turned, because the night of the insurrection, everybody was trying to get in front of a microphone to condemn it. And then things started to kind of roll out, and they began
or
to
just
hear
not
from
say anything.
Right.
I think there's a lot of fear, in saying something.
Hey, and I want to say this because we brought up Paul Pelosi's attack last week, and just how horrible that was. And some politicians were poking fun at the Pelosi's and making inappropriate remarks. But I want to call attention to one Republican congressman who did the right thing, and that was Steve Scalise. Scalise was shot a few years ago while practicing for the congressional baseball game that they have every year.
Right. Uh-huh.
And he came out and had a strong statement in support of the Pelosi's and denouncing that kind of violence. So I want to be reminded and remind the audience that there are still, even though we have deep disagreements on policies and how to take the country forward, I hope that in both parties there, when something like this happens, there are decent stand-up people who say the things like Congressman Scalise said.
Right. Okay. So circling back, you mentioned the Good News Club. And when I was listening to it was so ironic because I listened to her book this weekend. You were out of town, and I went on. My nervous energy about the midterms led me to clean out closets and cabinets and all this.
They look great, by the way. Well done.
Thank you. So I was in our closet and cleaning out, and I ran across a box of my old school assignments about the time she was telling this story about, like you said, the Good News Club. And it just rocked me because I remember seeing those notes come home, like I mentioned in the interview, for our kids and come be part of this Good News Club. And I didn't really, I don't know, I didn't pay attention to them, but I remember that. And I remember some of our kids' friends going to this. And as she was telling the story in the lead up, you're thinking, oh, this is crazy and such an outlier situation. I'm like, no, I remember both in Texas and in Oklahoma seeing this. So, but about that time, I also came across a box of my old school assignments.
Oh, this is good. Kids, gather around. You guys,
I am.
Remember that in the internal fundamentalists that Missy talked about with the Brian McLaren?
She's about to be all loud and proud. You guys, I am mortified that I'm about to read this to you.
If you're in the car, make sure you pull over because this is
so embarrassed by this. But I found
this
project that I did I was 12. I was 12 years old. And as we're talking about getting kids in and indoctrinating them early, this is super relevant because I wrote in a report that I turned in to a teacher who I want to go find that teacher and apologize. I feel, quote, again, 12-year-old me, I feel that if a woman went out and willfully had sex, then it's her fault and she should at least have the kid and put it up for adoption.
Damn, Ann Coulter.
I'm sweating just reading that. I don't know where that came from. I was 12. I didn't know. I mean, I know I knew people in my life who had had abortions, but I didn't personally know of any situation. Right. It honestly, I mean, in my parents' defense, it wasn't really something we talked about at home. Mm-hmm. The only thing I can think is it was church and those types of environments that planted these ideas in my head. And by the time I was 12, I felt empowered enough to write about this in an assignment.
Yeah.
So you think about this, you think about the Good News Club and things like this, like this is what we're doing to our kids. And somewhere along the way, that got into my psyche as well. And there's so much wrong with this quote. Mm-hmm. I mean, so much wrong with it. Not what's glaring is the victim blaming here. Mm-hmm. If she chooses, if she willfully has sex, it's her fault. Oh my God. I cannot believe I wrote this. I agonized over whether to even share it and put it out there. But I think it's important to note that when you bring elementary school kids into an environment where you tell them things like, you don't want to go to hell and your church isn't preaching the right kind of gospel. And, that sticks.
Yeah. Clearly
it sticks. Again, I don't remember prior to the age of 12 ever talking about this with my parents.
Right.
It's just scary.
Yeah, it is very scary. And to me, that is the hypocrisy of conservative Christianity. Because we've heard it during the midterm elections, we don't want to have these woke classrooms with these woke teachers, and they shouldn't be teaching theories like critical race theory or, teach the right narrative about the founding of the country. And the reality is what they really want is to supplant that truth and that accuracy with their own theological conscience. And so that's what's frightening to me.
Okay, so I feel like at this point, a really great quote from our beloved prophet Moira Rose.
Okay, here we go.
Is applicable when she says, "You are blind to reality, and for that I am most proud." But I feel like that's where the power hungry, those who are kind of the orchestrators of the movement are most proud of that.
Yeah.
That people in the masses are blind to reality, and they're most proud of that. So anyways, sorry.
No,
I digress.
That's excellent. So at any rate, it's a great interview, this whole thing about the Good News Club. In fact, her first book is entirely about that story.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and so it's really well done. But we want to encourage you to go pick her book up. It is really, really good. The Power Worshippers. But just appreciate her spending some time with us today on the pod. Okay,
go ahead.
Earlier in the week, as the results were coming in, as we've already mentioned, you weren't doing so good.
No.
But now you're a lot better. So.
Well, I mean, thank God for modern medicine and distilleries. I don't know. No, I'm better now. But our state, I think, is what is so disheartening to me. And we reelected a governor who just fundamentally has some differences from what you and I believe.
What's interesting about, especially on the governor's race, I mean, I talk to Republicans. We have family and friends who are Republicans, and they were frustrated with our governor.
Yes.
And they were outspoken about it.
Yes.
And so it was really mind-blowing. Not that he won, but
the margin.
The margin in which he won.
Because anyways, we can go into this, and I don't think our general audience necessarily is into Oklahoma politics, but the biggest, it's not even the governorship. The biggest disappointment was the state superintendent.
Yes.
And it is so disheartening. And I was talking to a neighbor the other day about this because we don't have kids in public school anymore here. And so there's just a lot of guilt involved, but also a lot of just crushing, just devastation for our friends and family who still do have children in the school system. And we have just elected a state superintendent who openly is against public schooling.
Yeah. I mean, it really is frightening. And, we've got two little nephews who are going to be growing up here in Oklahoma and attending public schools. I've got my brother is a public school teacher, so is his wife. We come from a public school background. And the election of this state superintendent was mind-blowing because this guy is as radical as they get. He has talked openly about failing public schools. They've been failing for decades. He and the governor have just released what they're calling an executive order to basically break the teachers' unions. He has openly criticized teachers for talking about history, calling it critical race theory, and wants to rewrite history so that they can teach this whitewashing of history. He has also very, very active in trying to ban certain books. from the libraries. And because of his rhetoric, we have gotten phone calls from librarians in the state of Oklahoma who have been threatened with violence.
Right.
And we're hearing from teacher after teacher saying that they are almost frightened to teach anymore because of what their government as well as parents are saying to them in the public schools, and nobody's protecting them. And it is terrifying.
And you know, the funny thing is there's just a subset of the population that just, like we've said before, does not get irony. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things they run on is during COVID when schools shut down, they thought that was wrong. We're going to keep schools open. Oh, but no, we're not, because we don't like public schools.
Yeah. That is,
which is it?
Yeah. And it's the same thing with vouchers. They are criticizing public schools after year upon year upon year that they have defunded public schools. They've reduced funding to public schools. They have put more and more restrictions on public schools. So they have been strategically trying to implement a failure plan, and then they criticize it. And what do they want to do? They want to privatize everything. And so they want vouchers. And there's statistics and studies out there that show this does not work.
No, we need to be in the business of educating all children.
Absolutely.
And private schools do not have to do that.
No.
And so what's going to happen in Oklahoma is you're going to see rural schools close.
Yeah. And that is what is so frustrating. And I just want to sit down with our friends who live in these rural communities, who support individuals like our current governor and now Secretary of Education. They will be the first one that are harmed when these policies are in place.
Right. Voting against your own self-interest.
Yeah.
But anyways, so it was just a kind of a depressing.
But you're doing better now.
I'm doing better.
Okay.
It's a good thing we didn't have to record last night.
Oh, that would have been podcast gold.
No, not so much. But we're a couple of days out now. As of this recording, there's still a lot up in the air, which may be decided once we release this. So our apologies if anything is not current. We do need to mention, though, Happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day. We love our veterans, and we have, I know, my father, my grandfather, my uncles, lots of veterans in our family, and we're just so appreciative of their service and their sacrifice. And we hope that we do right by them in terms of what they served for and what they fought for.
Yeah. And Veterans Day was established in 1919 by a declaration by President Woodrow Wilson. It was first declared Armistice Day and later turned into Veterans Day. And so we just, all of our veterans out there that are listening, we just want you to know we appreciate you. We thank you for the sacrifices that you have made for our country and for us personally. We know it's difficult. We know that there's a lot of work, and again, the sacrifices that you put in, you and your families. And so on this Veterans Day, we just want to say thank you. And if you have a veteran in your family, if you have a friend or a coworker who's a veteran, make certain to let them know today how much you appreciate them, because they are some of our best.
Absolutely. And we need to do what we can to make them proud.
All right. So happy Veterans Day, and we'll be back next week.
Excellent. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.